everyone, and welcome to NCSL's webinar titled A Mission to Serve, State Activities to Help Veterans Access Transportation. I'm Alice Sweet with the National Conference of State Legislatures. We're excited to have you all here, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to go over a couple technical things with you before we begin. If you can't see the control panel to the right of your screen, there is an orange arrow that you can click and it will slide out, and that should give you access to a chat box where you can submit questions. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to send them in. We will hold all of them until the end, but we will be able to also respond to you through text as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator, Senator Letitia Vandepute. Senator Vandepute is a practicing pharmacist since 1980. She represents a large portion of San Antonio, Texas. As a former 5-term state representative, she has represented Texas Senate District 26 since 1999. In January, she was unanimously elected by her colleagues to serve as President Pro Tem of the Texas Senate's 83rd regular session, and in May, she was sworn in as governor for a day. Senator Vandepute is very active in military and veteran issues in her home state and nationally. She also serves on our NCSL Task Force on Military and Veterans Affairs. So we're very pleased and honored to have her here today.
Thank you very much. Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to the National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, A Mission to Serve, the State Activities to Help Veterans Access Transportation. I'm Senator Letitia Vandepute right here in San Antonio, Texas, and along with my service in the legislature as chair of the Senate Veteran Affairs and Military Installations Committee, I'm very proud to serve as one of the co-chairs to the NCSL Task Force on Military and Veteran Affairs. Now, this task force is made up of more than 50 state legislators representing 25 states, and it was created basically to examine the issues affecting our military communities, relations, and the health and well-being of veterans. So we look both at the active duty components and their families, and our veterans and their families. So today's webinar will look at what our states are doing to help veterans who are in need of affordable and, most importantly, very dependable transportation options. Transportation is really what makes it possible for our veterans who are returning to our communities to, number one, access jobs, for school, for medical appointments, and also for mental health care, for social events, which are critical to reintegration. Those social events may include things in the community or may include visits with family and friends. And this is a key component for successful reintegration after departing military service. For the state of Texas, it's common sense. I mean, we like to pride ourselves, like all other states, being very military friendly. But for us, it is a huge issue. We have 15 military installations in Texas with total defense personnel of over 255,000 people. That includes 55,000 folks on the civilian side. Now, I don't know how many are there today, but we certainly know that it has a great economic impact. Just in my state, our economic impact from the Department of Defense is over $149 billion, including direct income, that salary and payments of $55 billion. Our veteran population is 1.7 million, but it's not just about those veterans and their families. When you think about the GI Bill, and particularly that post-9/11 GI Bill, all of the people that live in your community, those veterans that are taking a real portion of our federal education benefits, they're using things that they have earned. That also includes in those educational benefits a monthly housing stipend. In our state, it's about $900 million a year just in those GI benefits. And so it's very, very important for our state. And I'm really thankful for this opportunity for us as state legislators to look at what we can do in states with regard to our mission to serve those who have served us and help our veterans access transportation. During the hour, we'll hear from several distinguished speakers who really know a lot about this subject. Our first speaker, Rick Opstelton, is a program analyst with the United We Ride initiative, and he works at the Federal Transit Administration. Rick helps ensure that the coordination of more than 80 federal funding sources that support specialized transportation services for people with disabilities or older adults, and also people with limited and low incomes. Through that coordinating council on access and mobility, Rick and his group help foster the work of all of our groups that find solutions to transportation problems through collaboration and coordination. Our second speaker is Ms. Jamie Rawl, and she's a senior policy specialist at the transportation program at NCSL and one of our co-authors of the NCSL report. In addition to veterans transportation, Jamie's other research and publications have addressed funding and finance, rail, aviation, transportation, technologies, and other issues. She's also the lead member staff to the NCSL Standing Committee on Natural Resources and Infrastructure. So you could just say she's kind of our internal guru on issues of transportation. Our third speaker, Ms. Kim Adair, is the Public Transit Program Manager at North Dakota Department of Transportation. And Ms. Adair has so many years of experience in public transit. Also in the private sector, she's coordinated human service transportation in Medicaid brokerages and call centers, and she has been so involved in numerous peer-to-peer exchanges across the country. And finally, we'll have Ms. Jean Palmatier, who's a regional transit coordinator at the Oregon Department of Transportation. Ms. Palmatier's work includes working with department planners to do that very critical integration of transit opportunities into transportation solutions as they are being developed. I mean, that makes the most sense. But she's got broad experience with transportation coordination issues and programs serving older adults and people with disabilities. Also with us today is Ms. Dina Vanderhyde, and she's the manager of the Transit Policy and Program section in Oregon as well. And so Ms. Vanderhyde's policy team works on implementing kind of that federal policy, looks at the legislative analysis and policy development, and basically helps participation in the department's research project. Anytime that you have a question or if you'd like to ask a speaker, please type it in the chat box. Your chat box on your screen should be toward the lower right-hand side. And after both speakers have given the presentations, I will read the questions, and then we'll provide an opportunity for our speakers to answer. Now, I know that you're probably wondering this, since Rick is with the Federal Transit Administration, and as you know, he can't join us today for the live event. And that's due to what's happening in D.C. and the lapse basically in federal funding. But we do have his recorded presentation for you. I want to thank NCSL staff. We thought that this might be coming, and so well planned to go ahead and have his recorded presentation. So I'd like to ask NCSL staff at this time, would you please play the comments that Rick has prepared for us?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rick Opstelton. I'm a program analyst with the United We Ride program at the Federal Transit Administration. I apologize very much for my having to speak to you today in this disembodied way. Unfortunately, the federal government shutdown has compelled me to use these unusual technological means while I myself personally am seated in the cafe around the corner from my apartment. That being said, it is my pleasure to speak to you in whatever means possible in today's conference, in today's webinar. Very happy to talk just a little bit about United We Ride and about the Veterans Transportation Community Living Initiative that we foster, and also a little bit also about our work with the National Conference of State Legislatures. So next slide, we'll go and we'll talk just a moment about United We Ride. United We Ride is a federal interagency operation. It's an initiative that's housed within DOT, but that comprises some 11 federal agencies. We work to promote efficient, effective, coordinated transportation services for people with disabilities, older adults, those with low incomes, and others who have various kinds of transportation disadvantages. Next slide. Our goals are threefold. Very simply, to have and promote effective transportation such that it satisfies the customer's needs so they can achieve the mobility they need to be able to be active in their communities. Efficient transportation, so transportation that is provided in a way that uses the taxpayer's dollar to the greatest ability, reducing duplication, inefficiency. The classic example is running one van into a neighborhood as opposed to three to pick up 3 people. Yeah. Accessible transportation. The goal here really is to see that services that are available to folks are known by them and readily accessible to them. And we'll talk just a bit more about how the VTCLI program, the Veterans Transportation Community Living Initiative, forgive me, is particularly helpful in addressing several of these goals. Our philosophy is, very briefly again, nothing about us without us. This is a phrase, a mantra that comes from the disability civil rights movement, if you will, and basically speaks to the fact that anything that we implement as an initiative, as we would desire as a country, that serves a group of people should have that group of people at the table in directing its services. Next slide. The tools that we use within United We Ride to address some of our policy goals are threefold. One, special initiatives, such as the Veterans Transportation and Community Living Initiative, that we're going to talk about some more. Our Back to Work initiatives are several, and we're working actually at the moment to address healthcare. We also use a series of working groups that bring together, as I've mentioned, the 11 federal agencies that comprise our initiative into the Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility that address all kinds of policy issues from a federal, state, and local level, with obviously a focus on the federal, that have an impact, if you will, on transportation coordination and service availability. So we look at things like open government, emergency preparedness, health wellness, transportation, veterans transportation, etc. The technical assistance centers, of which the National Conference of State Legislatures is one, are also tools we use very happily to craft our message and push it forward into various communities. So NCSL is extremely helpful to us in terms of providing that research about state-level activities that we all know very heavily impact the availability of transportation services. And what are, in fact, those initiatives that are working well in states and providing technical assistance to state legislatures and others as to legislative, initiatives that could be undertaken and that are helpful. Next slide. VTCLI, the Veterans Transportation Community Living Initiative, just to briefly address it, awarded $63 million to 86 communities in 37 states to develop or expand one-click, one-call systems that link veterans and others in their community to transportation resources. What we're doing here very directly is creating that access point, one-click, one-call, that will connect a person to all of the transportation resources that they would be able to use to access their community. And here I'll just quickly show a map of where the various awards were given for VTCLI. You'll see that it's quite a smattering across the country. Several of these are in fact statewide initiatives, but a good number of places here are represented. And I'll just spend, since I have only 5 minutes in total, I want to just quickly address what is done, what we think is accomplished through the Veterans Transportation Community Living Initiative. So on the one hand, very clearly, setting up a one-click, one-call kind of center addresses that access goal. It creates that ease of connection for someone to pick up the phone and find from a myriad of options that we know are out there, those rides, those opportunities that are going to be most effective for them to get what they need in terms of transportation to where they're going and so they can live their life most fully. But also very important to us, the Veterans Transportation Community Living Initiative strengthens partnerships with that key population of veterans. This is a very important demographic in our community. It's one that we all wish to serve, but again, one that in fostering our goal of inclusive planning and nothing about us without us, we want to have at the table. So part of the program that we're also very proud of is the fact that it requires the re-examination of community-level plans for transportation. It requires that veterans and veterans groups and those representing this community of our military families and the like be present at the table as we examine in our community what transportation services are there, how well are they addressing the needs of our community, and what might be done to do more to serve those who have served us. And lastly, there's a strong component of this program that promotes open government. So again, fostering that nothing about us without us through the use of social media. And this is something that DOT is very interested in pursuing, having been included in our strategic plan, to see that people are able to involve themselves in planning and have a voice at the planning table for not only a program like VTCLI, but for their community's attempts to address transportation at large. And we are hoping to use VTCLI sites and programs as a test case, essentially, for how you can use social media applications to bring people to the table and allow their voice to be heard in a different sort of way. So that, again, just is a very brief introduction to United We Ride. We are very happy to be working with NCSL, and I'm very excited that this report has been issued, and we'd like to hear a great deal more. And I'm getting very sorry not to be able to be with you in person today, but I hope you have, for the rest of your day, a wonderful day. And thank you very much. Next slide, we'll close off. And again, my thanks and
well, thanks. If Rick was here in person, I'd be thanking him in person. But again, I want to thank our staff for thinking ahead of time that this might happen, and certainly Rick's dedication to this particular issue with veterans and their ability for them to obtain affordable and consistent transportation. Now, I'd like to ask Jamie Rawl to provide you with some of the highlights from our NCSL report on veteran transportation that's released in January. And I know that part of it was a case study that we looked at, in particularly within our own state of Texas. Jamie?
Well, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Rawl from NCSL staff, and I'd also like to thank the many, many people who joined us here today. My role here is to offer a broad context for the case studies that follow by talking about some of the many critical ways in which states across the nation are helping veterans get where they need to go. I represent NCSL, the host of this webinar, and for those of you who may be less familiar with us, NCSL is the bipartisan organization that serves the legislators and legislative staff in all the states and territories through informational services and peer exchange opportunities for policymakers. We're regarded as the nation's authority on state policy issues, and we also produce research on state policy for a variety of partners, including federal agencies such as FTA. I specialize in transportation issues, but as a whole, NCSL covers all topics that might be of interest to states, from same-sex marriage to pensions to unions and more. My colleague and co-author Alice Wheat, who is gallantly running this webinar behind the scenes today, also covers veterans and military affairs for NCSL. As the Senator mentioned, my remarks this afternoon are based on a comprehensive analysis that we recently did on state actions that facilitate transportation access for all veterans for all purposes, especially those that states have taken through statute, regulation, or legislation. We published this study earlier this year, and the final report is available for free online. The link will be on my last slide, and it includes a nationwide snapshot of what states are doing, a few in-depth case studies, and state-by-state profiles based on survey data from stakeholders in all the states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And I know that some of the survey respondents are participants on this webinar today, so let me say thank you directly. As for all our 50-state research, it took a village to gather the data for this report, and so we really appreciate your help. First, let's talk about a few of the societal and demographic changes that have led to specific mobility challenges for military veterans. First, about 40% of the nation's veterans are 65 and older. Many World War II and Korean War veterans no longer drive, which not only affects their own mobility and access to needed services such as medical care, but also reduces available transportation for veterans across the board because these older veterans have often been the volunteer drivers upon which many veterans' transportation programs have depended. Meanwhile, younger veterans are also experiencing decreased mobility coupled with greater needs. A larger number of veterans now survive battlefield injuries that were fatal in previous wars, resulting in higher rates of service-connected disabilities and needs for ongoing therapeutic care. Statistics show that veterans are also more at risk for a variety of challenges, and as Senator Vanderputte mentioned, they require transportation to jobs, mental health care, social activities, and other services to support their successful reintegration. At the same time, a disproportionate number of them live in rural areas where both community services and transportation are less available. A common misconception that we saw even when conducting our research is that certain well-known federal and private volunteer programs meet all veterans' transportation needs, especially in terms of the widely recognized need for transportation to medical appointments and for disabled veterans. While valuable, the truth is that these programs are limited. Reimbursement and transportation services from the federal VA only cover transportation for specific trip purposes and destinations, such as VA medical centers and other veteran-related facilities. Volunteer programs also focus on medical transportation, and because most volunteer vehicles aren't wheelchair accessible, many veterans may not be able to receive services at all through these programs. Clearly, veterans' transportation issues extend beyond these specific needs, and more comprehensive mobility options are required, including innovative programs at all levels of government and in the private sector. These options can include personal vehicles or mass transit. Transportation choice is especially important for veterans with accessibility concerns, but really applies to all veterans looking for affordable, reliable ways to get to work and education, to visit family and friends, and to access the full range of services and activities to maintain a good quality of life. Fortunately, all levels of government are involved in helping veterans access transportation. The federal government, for example, has provided nationwide leadership and programs. In addition to the VA's ongoing reimbursement of eligible veterans for medical transportation and the VTCLI grant program that Rick spoke about, there are some other programs going on. Right now, the VA is accepting applications for its new grant program for transportation of veterans in highly rural areas to connect veterans to VA medical centers. Also, since 2011, the VA has run its Veterans Transportation Service to not only provide transportation to VA medical centers, but also to coordinate that transportation. And as many of you know, last year, the Federal Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility and the U.S. Department of Defense sponsored a national online dialogue to generate ideas about how to strengthen transportation choices for veterans. Thankfully, many of these valuable federal opportunities have been widely publicized and made use of. Likewise, the critical role of regional, local, and private agencies in addressing direct service needs and issues is by and large fairly well understood. But there is also a substantial role for states. By providing needed leadership and programs, states help fill the gaps in veterans' transportation services and can do so in a way that meets the unique needs of veterans within their borders. State legislatures in particular play a critical role. Just in this year's legislative sessions alone, at least 46 bills were introduced in 18 different states to support veterans' transportation. For the rest of my time today, I'll be discussing just some of the most common state activities, but keep in mind that states vary widely in their activities on this issue, and the full range is described in more detail in the full report. So talking about what states are actually doing. First, states have been working to improve transportation access for veterans by coordinating across state agencies. That coordination, as Rick was talking about, can help reduce service duplication and fragmentation, can use public resources more efficiently, and can make programs more accessible and comprehensible for those who need them. At our last count, which is soon to be updated, at least 28 states had state-level councils that work to coordinate transportation services across disparate agencies. These councils can include membership from state agencies and other stakeholder groups. At least 12 count veterans agencies or representative among their members. So those are interagency councils that deal with transportation services for all kinds of populations. In addition, several states have established councils focused on services across the board for veterans. And a few of those veterans councils have engaged transportation agencies as members. Also, as we'll hear about, a few states have created interagency task forces, kind of the center of this Venn diagram, that focus on veterans transportation issues specifically. Another key state role has been to provide needed funds for veterans transportation. Some states have awarded competitive grants to nonprofits to provide transportation services. Others have given needed assistance directly to veterans in financial hardship, and those funds can be used for emergency transportation or for vehicle repairs or payments. At least 13 states in the Virgin Islands have dedicated special funds or trust funds for these services. In addition, 18 states, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands fund programs through other means such as legislative appropriations or departmental budgets. Each of these state funds is unique with its own rules and priorities. Next, states are also providing key leadership. Some states, for example, have taken the lead in coordinating applications for some of those federal funding programs. As you see on the map here, of the federal VTCLI grants awarded so far, recipients have included statewide projects in 13 states, Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands, and local or regional projects under state leadership in 11 states. In addition, at least 10 states encourage or require inclusion of veterans' interests in federally required transit planning processes, and 4 states have initiated studies to assess and identify veterans' transportation needs. Finally, many of the respondents to our survey noted that the first step towards coordination is to form relationships among stakeholders, and numerous states have provided strong leadership to encourage such meaningful partnerships among transportation and veterans organizations across public and private sectors and at all levels of government. Here's a taste of some of the other critical state roles as well. As you see on this slide, some states have taken a direct role in contracting or providing transportation services for veterans, in addition to what services may be available from local transit agencies and nonprofits. These include North Dakota's program that we'll hear about shortly. Also, many state laws waive or reduce transportation fees and taxes for veterans, and in many cases for their surviving spouses. Well over half the states, for example, exempt veterans from some or all of their vehicle registration fees. And listed here are some of the other fees that are waived or reduced in various states. We already got a question in the chat box about voucher programs and transit cards for veterans. At least 6 states and Puerto Rico have encouraged free or reduced public transit fares for veterans, and 3 of those states and Puerto Rico, in those states, the state provides directly a discounted or free transit pass. And then Florida, New York, and Puerto Rico have waived tolls for eligible veterans. Also, at least 15 states offer special privileges, including parking privileges to qualifying veterans or to vehicles displaying certain veterans' license plates. My role today is to give a very whirlwind tour of the many ways in which states help veterans access transportation. In a moment, we'll turn to state experts from North Dakota and Oregon to give us an intimate look at the lessons they've learned in their states. I just wanted to mention here that our report also offers a broad look at key do's, don'ts, and recommendations from the many stakeholders we surveyed. So check it out for that as well. Well, thank you very much. Alice and I will be happy to answer questions via the chat box or during the Q&A. And our contact details are here. We're always available to provide more information offline or later on. I've also listed here the link for NCSL's publicly accessible, searchable, online bill tracking database, where you can view proposals being considered in legislatures across the country related to transportation access and mobility for veterans their families, and spouses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. And we appreciate the work that you and Alice have done on this very important issue. Now we'll hear from Ms. Kim Adair in North Dakota about their efforts to help veterans with transportation choices in the state. Please remember, for those of you on the line, and we're so thankful, we've got a great participation today. If you have a question, feel free to type it in your chat box at the bottom right-hand side. And we will make sure that we get as many questions as we have time for at the end of the webinar. We certainly have folks here that can answer it. And now I'll call on Kim Adair.
Thank you, Senator, and I wanted to thank Jamie and Alice for inviting me to present today. As I said, I'm from the North Dakota Department of Transportation, and formerly I had several years as a transit provider, so I kind of got both angles covered here. And my grandfather fought in World War II, so seeing the issues that veterans had, it's kind of a issue that I would like to see that we could conquer and make this better for everybody. We started out in North Dakota, if you go to the next slide, please, we have 8 regions for our highway side, but with transit we kind of narrowed it down to 5 regions, and we tried to get MPO or urban in each region, but we only have 3 urban areas, MPOs, in 3 of our regions, so A and C does not have an urban MPO in them regions. But what we did, our region B, they have such a great working relationship in that region B that we started up there like 2.5 years ago, having quarterly meetings up there with the providers and just talking to them. And we had the veterans person, we had the aging person, we had the Medicaid person, all the transit providers coming to the table and talking. What could we do to make transit better in y'all's region? So they was all at the table, and we was all talking and discussing this and seeing what we could do. And we had the MPO and the urban provider at the table also. And we wanted to apply for the first round of VTCLI grants, but I couldn't quite talk Cities Area Transit out of Grand Forks into applying the first time. Well, so the second time come around, and Cities Area Transit said, okay, we'll apply this time. So they applied with us as a partner with them, and we was awarded the grant and with a statewide grant for the VTCLI. So what our intentions was to first, phase 1 was implement Region B with a call center for that region. And what was that call center? They had software at Grand Forks County, and we was going to implement a one call, one click center in Region B for all the transit providers there and for all the veterans, and not only for the veterans families, but anybody can use that one click, one call center. So it was going to benefit everybody in that region. And then we're just going to slowly implement it statewide. So everybody will have the benefit of the call center. And we were going to put call centers in each region. So the next slide, please. So just like the VTCLI, when it came out in the Federal Register, this was our goals of how we wanted to implement the resources and the partnerships and the involvement for all the local agencies. So we just started talking to people and bringing people to the table of who we wanted to get involved and how we was going to benefit people and who this was going to help. So we started talking to the transit providers and everybody else in the area, and they was having to call one county to get to another county. We have a lot of duplication in services. Our veterans, they're having to leave at 5 o'clock in the morning and stay till 9 o'clock at night, and they're having to go one side of our state to the other from east to west or west to east to get to a hospital, or go to South Dakota to get to a veterans hospital. So it's kind of sad the way that our system works. And talking to our VA commissioner, we've had a lot of struggles with the veterans because none of the veterans' vehicles have lifts. And of course, nowadays, some of the veterans that are coming back from Afghanistan and stuff, they need lifts. Not only our older veterans, but our younger veterans. So we was really struggling with this, and he our veterans officers here in North Dakota didn't realize how to access us or what all we could do for them. So getting our veterans officers that was in our station in our counties, we found getting them to the table was enlightening. And not only getting the commissioner to the table, but getting the county workers to the table and informing them what we did was just, you know, it was an eye-opening experience for them because they just didn't understand what all we could do for them. So the next slide, I'm sure, or the next, you can just go to the next two slides, actually skip that one, go to the next one. You know, I'm sure everybody has seen, the next slide, please, I'm sorry. I'm sure everybody has seen this vision of the perfect call center and how everything is supposed to go. And with the software that we're going with, you know, this is the vision that we would like to see is, you know, stuff is being done on the background with, you know, we'll have a coordination module where the people are not seeing what's going on, that's going on behind the scenes with our mobility managers that we have in the region, that they're taking care of that behind the scenes, and the person's calling one number, and then the mobility manager and their software is doing what it's supposed to do. So the veteran is not knowing if they're you know, they may be calling 3 or 4 people, or the coordination module is putting it on what vehicle it needs to be on, but they're making the one call and they're calling the call center and it's getting taken care of, instead of the veteran having to suffer and call 3 or 4 people to find out what's the easiest way I need to get to my doctor's appointment for today. And go to the next slide, please. And then, of course, our goal is to facilitate greater personal mobility for all individuals in the region and the state of North Dakota. And then what we did with the Veterans Grant is we have an NDDOT website, and then we want to inform and educate the public and have seamless regional transportation and state transportation. We'll have a single point of access in each region. Eventually, that's what our goal is, of course. And then the Grand Forks will have information referral center. And then if you go to the next slide, it shows that the providers in that Grand Forks region is the ones that are going to be doing the coordination module is Nutrition United, Pembina, Walsh, Devils Lake, and Benson County. They're the ones that's working with cities area transit in that region, so we're excited about what's going on up there with them. And then I'm trying to hurry because I know I don't have much time. But the other thing that Jamie was talking about is our VA grant that we have with, that we're trying out with the VA as something interesting. We have talked to the VA commissioner, and he doesn't want to get any more vans for North Dakota. So, as I said, they don't know what we do and didn't know what we do. So we've been working with him for quite a while now and talking about how we can make things better for people in North Dakota. So he has got all of our fares, all of our services, and where we go, what we do, how many days a week we go all across the state. So if anybody needs service, he has all this stuff wrote down. And so we can, if somebody needs to go on a veterans transportation, he could actually look at his stuff, his schedule, and put them on one of our vehicles. He can call one of our providers and say, okay, I need Jane Doe to get on this vehicle and go because I know that vehicle goes today. So he's accessing us that way instead of trying to put him on a VA van because he knows we're out there every day, and the veterans vans are not out there every day. So he's applied for 2 counties in North Dakota to get the VA grants, and that way he doesn't have to buy new vans for the VA, and they don't have accessible vehicles anyway. But what he does, when we have our quarterly meetings, we invite, like I said before, we invite the VA people in the counties, and we also invite the VA commissioner to come to our meetings. That way he talks to our providers directly, and then our providers know what's going on with the VA money, the veterans, and the transportation issues and their struggles, because he gets the complaints himself. So it's very interesting to hear his side of the story. And then if you'll just go to the end of my PowerPoint, it's a couple slides in. Other items that we do quite often is we have state agency meetings here at the DOT where we invite the VA person in charge, we invite the aging person in charge, we invite the Medicaid person in charge, and we all come to the table and we talk about the issues in just transit. And that way, instead of, you know, if we can't make it right and we can't make everybody understand about what's going on in transportation, how are we going to make the riders understand what's going on and what their needs are? Because if I can't talk to aging and let them know what my need is and what my riders' needs are, how are they going to know themselves? So we do that quarterly as well. And then we also have regional meetings out in each region, and then we always invite guest speakers. So we'll have the VA, and then we'll have Medicaid, and then we have aging come and talk to all our transit providers. And then as far as the providers, you got to let the people know what you do, and that was something that really surprised me when I got to North Dakota, is that people did not know about public transportation. So you got to tell your story, because if you don't tell it, nobody else will. And if, you know, I'm a firm believer in transportation, and I love it, and I breathe it, and I always tell everybody I'm a transit geek. But you just got to believe in transportation, and you got to want it, and, you know, God help the veterans, and that's what we're here for. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Finally, we have Jean Palmatier, and I know that Dinah van der Heide is on the line, but I think Jean's going to be providing us with some of the details about what the state of Oregon has done.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to share our experience, and I will be speaking on behalf of Dinah and I and our other partner, Joni Bramlett. You'll find more about Joni at the end. Slide. My slides aren't up. I'll go on. Oregon is primarily a rural state. We have 3 large urban areas and 6 small. 3 of our counties each have less than 2,000 people. Go to the next slide, please. Stay there. The majority of the population in Oregon resides on the western side of the state. You might notice all the blobs going north and south. That is our Willamette Valley, and about 70% of the population resides in that area. In Oregon, there are 328,000 veterans, of which 152,000 are older than 65 years old, and 5,500 are receiving pensions, and about 13,700 are receiving disability compensation claims of one type or another. Next slide, please. This map shows the intercity and rail network. It also shows the major VA medical hospitals. It's important to note that north of Portland, Oregon, there is a facility in Vancouver, Washington. Walla Walla is actually in Washington, and there's a facility at Boise, Idaho. So every county has a transit service. However, many services are localized and do not connect in regional networks, which for vets, this limitation can be a big barrier to medical services. Next slide, please. In Oregon, the Oregon legislature created the Legislative Task Force on Veterans Transportation in the 2009 session. 6 agencies, Transportation, Employment, Human Services, Veterans Affairs, and the Oregon Military Department participated. The task force was chaired by our Oregon Department of Transportation Public Transit Division Administrator. This task force was part of the reintegration initiative designed to connect vets to housing, education, employment, and other resources. Go to the next slide, please. The reintegration initiative hosted a series of community halls which consistently identified the lack of transportation to and from VA appointments as a major barrier. So the task force's purpose was to explore the issues related to transportation and to make recommendations for improvements. Next slide, please. The report finding confirmed many things we've already talked about here today, which is ADA accessible transportation is lacking, particularly in rural areas, particularly for those 2 primary groups of veterans volunteer drivers, which is the Disabled American Vets and the VA itself. In Oregon, the the DAV operates a routed system along that network of highways you saw with non-accessible vehicles, and they stop they have stopping points, so they don't go off the highway. They'll pick you up at their stopping points. And the VA hospitals each have a volunteer driver program in their local area for, again, specific purposes. One of the things the study identified was volunteer drivers are aging out and younger vets are not volunteering, so that the available services in the rural areas are diminishing. And the VA travel programs are very complex and very discouraging for vets, and so some of them just don't even take advantage of them. And generally, vets are unaware of public transit, and there was a lack of coordination between transit providers and vets organizations. However, we did find that in rural areas, because veteran service officers are often co-located with transportation services, there was actually a higher rate of coordination in the very rural areas than in other areas of the state. Most transit agencies in Oregon already serve vets, but we need more. Next slide, please. The key recommendations of our study, there were a lot of recommendations. I'm focusing on the ones particular to the Oregon Department of Transportation, was to reduce the unmet need for transportation by educating vets. One aspect of this was to work with veterans resources to create information regarding transportation. For example, a web page, social media, paper-based materials, and talking points. We have not so far established a comprehensive program at this time, and that is something we are planning to work on in the near future. We also want to create new opportunities to expand the pool of resources by tapping into existing transit resources. In Oregon, we already have 7 transit agencies that serve as non-emergency medical transportation brokers, and each of those brokers already operates a call center and has a pool of available transportation resources. So in a sense, we had a head start on the one call, one click idea. In fact, 2 of these 7 brokers are recipients of one call, one click grants. There are transportation coordinators in Oregon who are not Medicaid transportation brokers who also provide regional transit services, for example, Ride Connection in Portland, Oregon. The report also recommended that the current VA and DAV services be augmented with accessible equipment and that we coordinate our transit with them more closely. The last recommendation is not in the purview of ODOT, but it's obvious that the more local the medical services are to the veterans, the fewer barriers to accessing those services. And since the report was written, the growth of community resources is much larger. There are now 22 communities with VA clinics and or medical centers. So next slide, please. What did ODOT do? Well, first, we picked something we thought was low-hanging fruit, which is, as a DOT, we award grants for vehicle replacement. So we thought what we would do is take some of those returning vehicles, refurbish them, and donate them to the VA and the DAV. Accessible. We're talking accessible equipment here. We want to make sure that folks with disabilities have access to service. So we were unable to make inroads with DAV, but the VA agreed to accept these used donated equipment. That was a coup for us. The transit agencies in the area where the donated equipment were located also agreed to train the volunteer drivers for passenger assistance. An added benefit of this is in Portland, Oregon, where Ride Connection is working with the Vancouver VA for the use of the technology that Ride Connection got a grant for the one call, one click, and the VA hospital got a federal award for the installation of Route Match. So we're really augmenting that idea of the one call, one click and the coordination of services in the Portland metro area. I'm going to talk more about the pilot project in an upcoming set of slides. And lastly, on this slide, in partnership with the ODVA, the report really said that we needed to get out there and be advocates for funding. So we are continuing to educate our legislators about the need for funds. And we may be successful for the current budget period, but we won't know for a few days. Next slide, please. This is an example of one of the vehicles that was donated. It's a pretty standard little bus, but of course the key feature here is the lift at the rear of the bus. Next slide, please. This is the project we're all really excited about. We're calling it the pilot project. We have very limited funds, $100,000, a drop in the bucket. So we decided to establish a project that would not be statewide. We do not know exactly what a design of a program should be. So we don't know a lot about the needs of vets. We know that vets need connection to transportation, to medical services, but how frequently, what is their pattern of travel, all those kinds of factors weigh in when we want to cost out a service. So we felt it was necessary to provide a few options to try to determine what service design appears to be the most appropriate in terms of cost and delivery. The Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs, in consultation with ODOT, selected 3 areas in Oregon for the pilot program. These areas were selected by the number of veterans, the apparent lack of transit resources, and we also wanted various locations in the state. Sites were selected in Central Oregon, the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, in Southern Oregon at the Rogue Valley Transportation District, and in Central Willamette Valley, which is the Cascade West Council of Government. In total, 10 out of Oregon's 33 counties are included. The pilot project funds are limited to VA-sponsored medical purposes only. The report pointed to this need specifically. Any vet is eligible as long as he or she has a medical card issued by the VA. And we are using state source funds to allow for maximum flexibility in the program design that is not limited by any federal restrictions, potential federal restrictions. Veterans do pay for the fares when charged on public transit. A couple of years ago, there was a bill that was dropped at the Oregon legislature to provide low-cost or free transit fares for vets, and the vets themselves testified against it primarily because of the fiscal impact on cash-strapped transit agencies. So we were rather surprised but happy about that. Next slide, please. The pilot project is primarily a resource development project. It's not building an independent program. It's a program to leverage existing services. There is a mobility management component for travel planning, travel training, and others. And we try to use the available services first, coordinating with the VA, other transit, and only adding segments of service if we have to. Next slide, please. The study, our pilot project is really analyzing. Most of these projects, or all of these projects, are less than 1 year into the project. So we have very limited data so far. But we're looking at the rides, cost, and all the factors that make a successful program. Next slide, please. We have had some great successes when the local veterans representatives are involved. They are a facilitator of information. Most of the trips are already possible with existing resources. The trips are shorter than we anticipated because of the existing of more local medical resources. And the vehicle donation program had limited success because the vehicles were too old. We want to try to figure that one out. I think it has potential, but that was a factor we didn't anticipate. We should have. Veterans need more than medical trips for successful integration, so we'd like to grow the program. Next slide, please. And our next steps are to continue with the very important communication with the Oregon legislature. We have reported back several times, and we continue to follow, continues to follow this issue. As I said before, we wish to expand the program, and and add state and federal funds to go statewide. We are continuing to evaluate the program to refine it, and we have also added, we are not a state with a statewide coordinating council, but we did, no, I mean close. Hi. So we are continuing, and the last slide has our contact information.
Well, thank you very much to Jean, and I know Dinah's on the line. I want to thank our speakers today. We do have, I think, just a few minutes for some questions. So I want to remind anybody that if you want to type it into the chat box. We do have one specifically right now for Kim Adair that wants to ask, in North Dakota, the website, was there a specific, for the North Dakota Department of Transportation website, was there a specific area dedicated to veterans, or were services integrated throughout the site? The person asking the question said they operate a one-call, one-click transportation resource center, but they are wrestling with the idea of making a veteran-specific area to our site to make it feel more perspective, so it stands out. So they want to know what approaches on your website worked. And this is specifically for Kim.
Yes, on the North Dakota DOT website, we only have provider information and where you can go for what specific provider in that area. On the one-call, one-click website for the region, and B, it's more specific to veterans and stuff like that. So yes, theirs is.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The next question is for any and all the panelists, and the question is, are there any discussions going on to provide rebates for the private providers to offer lift transportation as long as the lift vehicles are primarily used for the UWR program? And maybe either Jamie or Jean can address that.
Not rebates. In Oregon, one of the strategies we've looked at is a user-side subsidy model where the passenger, that is the veteran, if we need a longer distance trip, what's a fair fare for a veteran? So we have not engaged private sector in terms of rebates. That would be a more difficult discussion.
Okay, and for those of you on the line that may not be familiar, that's the Unite We Ride program. Jean, did you want to add anything? Or was that you? Tim, did you want to add anything on that particular one?
No.
Okay. And this is a specific question for Oregon. What was done to include the private operators maybe in a supplemental mode or to supplement your transportation needs?
We already have private providers greatly engaged. Each of the transportation brokers, I'll use that term because it's really focused, it's built on the back of non-emergency medical transportation, but all of those brokers have a resource of both public and private sector providers. Private sector providers in Oregon are largely engaged through the brokerages. The key problem that we have is how to pay them, because non-emergency medical transportation pays a lot. Medicaid's a full funding program. Veterans transportation is not. And so these long-distance rides where the private sector is really probably the best resource, we've been struggling with that part of the program. So more to come in a future report.
Thank you. And we do have one last question. This is from someone that said another issue that they have encountered, and kind of similar to Oregon presentation, is that the veterans themselves are unaware of the transit resources. And our Veterans Administration in general, it's mighty difficult to navigate, and that those that do already have transportation are not posted online or ready accessible unless you kind of walk in and you pick up a dated schedule. Their question is that when they contact the VA satellite clinics and gathered support from the projects, but they're really having difficulty, are there any suggestions that you from both states have to overcome some of these challenges of working actually within the VA and with this VA satellite clinics to make it more efficient?
Well, and that's why I had said that Lonnie from our VA commission had got all of our rates, our schedules, and all of our provider information, and he put it together himself, and he gave it to all of his sites. That way, when someone calls, they have it, and it's from Lonnie. It's from the VA commissioner himself. And that way, they can't say, we didn't know that, because he put out something himself from all of our providers, because we talked, and he come to our meetings, and it's directly from him to them. So they can't say, well, we didn't realize they did that. So it's getting your VA people involved from the top down.
From the top down. Well, thank you. I know that I want to ask Jamie, because I want to concentrate on the time. Jamie, how are we? I know that there's a few other questions. I didn't know if we had time to address those.
We're running a few minutes over. Alice, you're the administrator here. What's your thought? Well, since we started a few minutes, oh, there she is.
I was muted. I'm sorry. I think we can stay on for 2 more minutes, but at 2:05 we'll end it for everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Well, actually, I think that what we hear is that, I want to tell you that we've had an amazing type of input today, and certainly so much on the attendance list. We want to thank everybody. But I think for Kim and Jean and for folks that work within the transportation space and for those that work within the veteran space, these are complex issues. And we know that the newly developed call centers that they have, you've got to maintain the staff necessary to coordinate that for veterans and others. And we know that funding is allocated in silos, and so it's difficult for our local communities and states to do that. But what we also know is that in each community, they really know what's happening with their veterans and those veterans groups and the local resources. So I want to thank everybody. One of the points and ask you to please read the wonderful document that NCSL provided is that it's a federal, it's a state, but we know that transportation is all about local, local, local. And sometimes it's that all begins with a conversation with your folks with the goal of let's get our veterans where they need to go so they can have a better quality of life. I want to wrap up today's webinar and thank all of you who are our speakers and our participants. If you would like to see this webinar again or suggest it to a colleague, the webinar is being archived and will appear on NCSL's website in a few days. Thank you to Kim, thank you to Jamie, thank you to Jean and for Dinah, and certainly for Rick, who could only be here tape recorded. With that, we will close out our webinar. Thank you very much for what you do in your state to serve those who have served us. Thank you.